Picture this. You're watching a young girl, no older than 6, standing in a cathedral that towers above her like stone giants. The weight of gold rests upon her small head, not the playful tiara of childhood dreams, but a crown that binds her to a fate she cannot comprehend. This is not a fairy tale. This is history's darkest chapter, where innocence becomes currency and children are traded like precious stones in the ruthless marketplace of power. You see her there, don't you? Small hands trembling beneath heavy ceremonial robes that pool around her feet like spilled blood. The ermine trim scratches against skin that should know only gentle touches, not the harsh reality of political machinery grinding forward. Her eyes, still bright with the wonder that should belong to any child, dart nervously around the opulent hall where her childhood dies in real time. Medieval England breathes around her, a world where survival depends on alliances forged in blood and sealed with rings placed on fingers too small to understand their meaning. The year stretches before us like a wound in time, when kings ruled through fear and children existed as pawns in games they'd never be allowed to understand. Stone walls whisper secrets of power, while tapestries tell stories of conquest, but none speak of the small girl whose life becomes collateral damage in the endless hunger for control. You feel the weight of those cathedral stones pressing down, don't you? Each arch reaching toward heaven while hell unfolds below in ceremonies dressed as celebration. Incense burns, thick and choking, masking the stench of corruption that permeates every corner of this gilded world. Priests chant Latin words that might as well be curses, blessing unions that mock the very concept of sacred vows. The man beside her, 29 years carved into sharp edges and hardened by warfare, represents everything he cannot yet comprehend about the adult world's capacity for cruelty. His presence looms like a storm cloud, casting shadows that will follow her through corridors lined with portraits of dead queens, each one a reminder of how quickly royal favor can turn to abandonment, how swiftly protection can become predation. But look closer at her face. Beneath the rouge applied by trembling servants, beneath the elaborate headdress that threatens to topple her small frame, something flickers. Not defiance. She's too young for that kind of conscious rebellion. No, what you see is something far more heartbreaking, the last moments of a childhood that will be systematically dismantled, piece by precious piece. The court watches with carefully arranged faces, nobles who've learned to smile while their souls calcify. They applaud this spectacle with jeweled hands that have signed away countless lives, their laughter echoing off marble floors where other children once played before political necessity swept them into adult nightmares. Ladies in waiting flutter like decorated vultures, their whispered conversations weaving webs of gossip that will eventually strangle truth itself. You must understand, this isn't simply about one marriage, one transaction between ambitious families. This is about a system that devours its young with methodical precision, that transforms children into symbols while their humanity bleeds away drop by precious drop. Medieval England operates like a vast machine designed to crush anything soft, anything innocent, anything that dares to exist outside the rigid parameters of power and submission. The ceremonies blur together, blessing after blessing, ritual after ritual, each one another link in chains invisible to everyone except the small girl they bind. Music swells from hidden alcoves where musicians play songs of celebration while witnessing the systematic destruction of everything childhood should represent. Their melodies float upward like prayers, but what God would answer prayers that sanctify such profound violation of innocence? Watch how she tries to stand tall, this 6-year-old queen, her spine straightening with an instinct for dignity that no amount of political maneuvering can crush. Something inside her recognizes the magnitude of this moment, even if her young mind cannot process the full horror of what's being done to her. She carries herself with unconscious grace, a tragic queen before she understands what queenship costs. The irony cuts deep, doesn't it? Here stands a child surrounded by more wealth than entire kingdoms possess, draped in silks that cost more than most families earn in lifetimes. Yet she is poorer than the lowliest peasant girl playing in muddy fields beyond these palace walls. Because that peasant child still owns her childhood, still wakes each morning to possibilities rather than predetermined fate. This crowned child has been robbed of something no amount of gold can ever restore. Behind every smile in this hall lurks calculated ambition. Behind every bow hides another agenda. The girl stands at the center of it all like a sacrifice adorned for slaughter, beautiful and doomed and achingly vulnerable in her elaborate costume of royalty. The crown upon her head becomes a symbol of everything wrong with a world that mistakes power for protection, ceremony for love. As incense smoke rises toward painted ceilings depicting biblical scenes of redemption, you realize that no salvation waits for her in those biblical promises. Her fate was sealed before she drew her first breath, written in contracts signed by men who never looked into her eyes, never heard her laugh, never considered that beneath all the political calculation lived a human heart capable of joy and terror in equal measure. The ceremonies end, but the horror has only just begun. This crowned child will learn that palace walls, no matter how beautiful, make perfect prisons when you're too small to reach. The Locks. What happens when innocence meets absolute power, and power decides innocence must be sacrificed? Born into privilege, yet stripped of choice, her life was traded like currency in a kingdom obsessed with power. You witness her first breath in a world that has already decided her worth. Before her lungs fill with air, before her eyes open to see light filtering through diamond-paned windows, ledgers are being balanced with her future as collateral. This is no ordinary birth. This is the emergence of a commodity wrapped in swaddling clothes, a political asset disguised as a baby girl. The manor house where she enters the world breathes with centuries of accumulated ambition. Stone walls have absorbed the whispered conspiracies of generations, each ancestor adding another layer to the family's relentless climb toward ultimate power. Tapestries depicting ancient victories line corridors where servants scurry with news of the birth, their footsteps echoing against floors polished with the sweat of those who understood their place in the hierarchy that now claims this newborn as its latest prize. Her father paces outside the birthing chamber, but his anxiety has nothing to do with paternal concern. You see him calculating even as midwives work, weighing the political value of daughters versus sons, already composing letters to potential allies who might view this child as an opportunity to advance their own schemes. His hands, soft from a life spent manipulating parchment rather than swords, tremble not with fear for his wife's safety, but with anticipation for the negotiations that will shape his daughter's destiny before she speaks her first word. England's aristocracy operates like a vast chess game where human beings serve as pieces, and this child has been born onto the board with a predetermined role. You feel the weight of expectation settling over her cradle like a shroud. Noble families don't produce children, they manufacture political instruments, each birth rep, resenting another opportunity to climb closer to the throne that glitters like a distant star in the consciousness of every ambitious house. The calculations begin immediately. Wet nurses are selected not for their maternal warmth, but for their discretion. Tutors will be chosen based on their ability to mold young minds toward family objectives. Even her name becomes a strategic decision, chosen to echo queens of old or honor potential patrons who might remember such flattery when marriage negotiations commence. Nothing about her existence will be left to chance or affection. Watch how her mother holds her. With hands that understand this child belongs not to maternal instincts, but to dynastic necessity. Love becomes a luxury aristocratic women learn to ration, knowing that emotional attachment complicates the brutal mathematics of political advancement. She cradles a daughter who will be raised to understand that personal desires are weaknesses that lesser families indulge, but noble houses sacrifice on the altar of ambition. The medieval world surrounding her birth operates on principles that would horrify modern sensibilities. Children exist to serve family interests, their individual humanity secondary to collective advancement. You see advisors already discussing potential matches, treating her infant form like a chess piece whose eventual placement might checkmate rival houses or secure crucial alliances. Her value lies not in her potential for happiness, but in her capacity to generate political capital through strategic matrimony. Letters begin circulating within days of her birth. coded messages travel between manor houses where other aristocratic families maintain their own careful records of births, deaths, and opportunities. Her existence becomes information to be catalogued and cross-referenced against family trees that map power like ancient cartographies, charting unknown territories. These correspondences speak of her not as a human being, but as a favorable development or interesting possibility. You must understand the suffocating nature of noble birth in this era. While peasant children might face poverty and hardship, they retain something infinitely precious, the possibility of choosing their own paths. This aristocratic infant has been born into wealth that comes with invisible chains, luxury that transforms into prison bars, privilege that masks profound powerlessness. Her birthright includes titles and estates, but excludes the fundamental human right to self-determination. The family's ambitious calculations extend far beyond immediate political gain. They envision generations of advancement built upon this child's eventual sacrifice. Her marriage will not unite two people, but two dynasties. Her children will not be grandchildren to love, but pawns for future manipulation. Every aspect of her existence becomes investment in a long-term strategy that treats human lives as expendable resources in the pursuit of ultimate power. Servants whisper in corridors about the baby's future, but their gossip reveals how thoroughly society has normalized the commodification of children. They speculate about potential husbands with the same casual interest they might discuss livestock breeding, entirely unconscious of the horror they're describing. This reflects a world that has systematically dehumanized its most vulnerable members, transforming children into negotiable assets. Behind the celebration of her birth lurks a darker truth. She has been condemned to a life without genuine agency from the moment she draws breath. The ceremonies honoring her arrival are simultaneously funeral rites for the autonomous individual she might have become. Noble families feast in celebration while unknowingly mourning the death of possibilities, the burial of a human soul beneath layers of political expectation. The irony cuts deep as you observe her in those early months. She plays with ivory toys carved by master craftsmen, sleeps in a cradle that cost more than entire villages earn in years, wears clothes woven from threads worth small fortunes. Yet she is poorer than any beggar's child, because those children retain something she has already lost, the right to grow up without predetermined destiny crushing their souls. Her laughter rings through halls lined with portraits of ancestors who made similar sacrifices, each painted face a reminder of how individual dreams die to serve family ambitions. These portraits watch over her childhood like silent judges, their eyes holding secrets of compromise and surrender that she will eventually understand when her own turn arrives to choose between personal happiness and dynastic obligation. As she grows from infant to child, you see her parents watching with eyes that calculate rather than celebrate each milestone. Her first steps are evaluated for poise that will impress future in-laws. Her first words are analyzed for intelligence that might enhance marriage negotiations. Even her childish games become opportunities to assess traits that will determine her market value in the aristocratic marriage exchange. The trap has been set before she could possibly understand its mechanisms. Born into a world that mistakes transaction for love, obligation for honor, she will spend her childhood learning to smile, while her soul slowly suffocates under the weight of expectations she never chose to bear. What happens to a human heart raised as currency in the marketplace of power? A lavish ceremony cloaked in grandeur hid the disturbing truth. A child bound to a man nearly 5 times her age. You stand witness to one of history's most grotesque spectacles masquerading as celebration. Westminster Abbey rises before you like a stone monument to divine authority, its soaring arches and stained glass windows creating an atmosphere of sacred reverence that will bless what should be condemned. The morning light filters through centuries-old glass, casting rainbow fragments across marble floors that will soon witness the systematic destruction of childhood innocence under the guise of holy matrimony. Listen to the cathedral bells echoing across London, their bronze voices proclaiming joy to a city that has gathered to celebrate what it dare not examine too closely. Each peal rings like a death knell for the 6-year-old girl who will enter this sacred space as a child and emerge as a wife. A transformation so fundamentally wrong that the very stones of the abbey seem to weep moisture down their ancient walls. The procession begins at dawn, and you see her carried in a litter that glimmers like a jeweled coffin. Silk curtains, embroidered with gold thread, worth more than entire estates, flutter around her small form as if trying to hide the horror they contain. Her dress, yards of ivory silk and cloth of gold that weighs nearly as much as she does, has been tailored to accommodate her child's body while creating the illusion of womanhood that makes this ceremony psychologically bearable for its adult witnesses. Watch her face as the litter approaches the cathedral doors. Beneath cosmetics applied by trembling women who understand exactly what they're preparing her for, you glimpse moments of pure childhood confusion. Her eyes dart toward sounds that might be games, movements that might be play, brief flashes of the 6-year-old she still is underneath the elaborate costume of matrimony. But those moments are fleeting, crushed under the weight of ceremony that transforms children into symbols, individuals into political statements. The cathedral fills with England's most powerful families, each representative positioned according to careful protocols that reflect their proximity to ultimate authority. You see them in their ceremonial best, velvets and ermines and jewels that catch light like frozen tears. But their faces reveal the dyed emptiness of people who have learned not to see what stands directly before them. They applaud this union with hands that have signed countless documents treating human lives as transferable property, their approval echoing off stone walls that have absorbed centuries of such calculated indifference. King Henry stands at the altar like a monument to masculine authority, 29 years of warfare and political maneuvering carved into features that might be handsome if they weren't so terrifying in this context. His presence dominates the sacred space with an energy that speaks of absolute power over life and death, over the bodies and souls of those who exist at his pleasure. When he looks at his approaching bride, you see not tenderness but possession, the satisfaction of a man claiming property that will serve his political and personal purposes. The ceremony begins with Latin words that transform horror into holiness, priests chanting blessings over a union that violates every natural law while conforming perfectly to human-made statutes that prioritize power over protection. Incense rises like prayers to gods who seem to have abandoned their duty to defend the innocent, while golden chalices reflect distorted images of faces that have learned to smile while witnessing atrocity. You must understand the psychological violence unfolding here. This child has spent weeks being prepared for this moment, not just in terms of ceremony and protocol, but through systematic conditioning designed to make her complicit in her own destruction. Servants and tutors have carefully explained her duties with euphemisms that transform trauma into obligation, fear into honor, powerlessness into privilege. She has been taught to see her terror as excitement, her confusion as anticipation. The exchange of vows becomes an exercise in surreal horror. Her small voice, barely audible, above the rustling of silk and the whispered prayers of witnesses, speaks words she cannot possibly comprehend. She promises obedience to a man whose very presence terrifies her.